Hello everyone, welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Game Club here at Tech Valley Game Space.
Yay!
Yay! Very exciting. So this will be cool. We've got a good initial group of participants here, and we're going to be meeting on a monthly basis and having a rotating host. So different hosts each time who will choose the game that we play, and the idea is we'll all play the games ahead of time, or perhaps in some rare cases play them together during the meeting if it's a multiplayer game, and then we'll have a book club style discussion. So our first game for this initial meeting is Judith, and we'll be discussing that. So I want to get started. The first thing that I think we'll do is just go around and have everybody who's involved here introduce themselves. Just quickly say your name and any short thing that you want about yourself. I'll start. I'm Jamey Stevenson. I'm the founder of Tech Valley Game Space, where we're hosting this inaugural meeting of the Game Club. And I'm a game developer, programmer, designer. I run my own little indie studio called Spoony Bird, and that's what I do. Go around clockwise.
I'm Anthony Rosello, and I'm at Tech Valley Game Space.
My name is Alana O'Hare, and I'm pretty new to game design, so I haven't really made anything yet, but I plan to.
My name is Dylan Bramblett. I'm a local developer who specializes in data warehousing and business intelligence.
My name is My name is Taro Mia. I work at my own indie company called Mia Games, and yeah.
My name is Robert Denner. I'm a narrative designer. I specialize in RPGs, mostly beginning of the 2000s, but I'm coming back.
David Salmanoff, New York chapter of the Internet Society.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So, yeah, as I mentioned, the game that I've selected as the initial host for our first meeting of Game Club is Judith. It's a game that was created by Terry Cavanagh, also known as the creator of Super Hexagon and VVVVVV, or possibly just V. I don't quite remember how you're supposed to pronounce it, but very good platform game. It was created in collaboration with Stephen Lavelle, who is a very prolific indie game developer who goes by, again, another name that I'm going to destroy the pronunciation of, but increpare or increpare. If you look up his website, he's insanely prolific developer and does lots of cool experimental games. So they're friends. I think they were flatmates at different points. I don't know if they were flatmates when they created this game, but yeah, they go way back, and they created this game Judith together. It was released in 2009, and we'll be posting the link up for anybody who's listening to this who wants to follow along and check it out. Definitely suggest maybe following along with us, play the game first if you like, and then come back to the discussion. But yeah, I think just this won't be very good for the audio portion, but can I get a show of hands of people who have actually played the game beforehand, just to make sure? Okay, cool. So most of us. So that's great. And then, yes, and we have one person who's playing it currently, which will be exciting in parallel with the discussion. So yeah, the game is, a short, kind of moody, atmospheric, first-person game, not a first-person shooter, but kind of visually reminiscent of the most old-school FPS games like Wolfenstein and such, although gameplay style is not, there's no Nazis to kill, which might make some people sad. We'll see. But it's based on a story, French folktale, tale of Bluebird. I'm going to be saying that constantly. Bluebeard. Bluebird would be a much happier story. But yeah, it's a famous French folktale, first known surviving version of which was published in 1697, written by Charles Perrault. And yeah, that's served as the inspiration for lots of other, it's served as the inspiration for famous opera. There's a novel by Kurt Vonnegut called Bluebeard that kind of follows, or at least is inspired by the original folktale. It's a really good Joanna Newsom song. It's inspired by it. So lots of different things, but to my knowledge, this was the first kind of attempt at any kind of game adaptation or being inspired by it. So what I want to start by doing is just going around, now that we've introduced everyone, and just hearing people's initial impressions of kind of what they thought about the game from playing it. So let's go counterclockwise this time, and we'll jump David since we could get your on-the-fly impressions based on the first 30 seconds or so.
I'm meeting Emily today. No.
That's right, you are.
Yeah.
First 5 seconds.
I'm sure.
So, Rob?
All right, so we'll catch up with you again, David. But so, Robert?
Well, when I first started playing it, I naturally picked up on the Wolfenstein reference, very much like that. I picked up on the Bluebeard reference pretty quickly but mostly I was pretty confused as to exactly sometimes who was talking, what was really going on. It felt to me very streamlined, like there wasn't very many choices throughout that.
So I actually had previous knowledge of the game before playing it. I believe it was a Let's Play, and I promptly forgot about actually watching that, and then started playing again, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. And my playstyle was try to break the game as much as possible, and I had quite a blast doing that. It was quite a funny game to play, to break as much as possible and figure out what kind of sequence breaking you can do, which there isn't much you can do, but there are a few that's kind of funny when you see it. So, yeah, that's what I thought.
I had no background with the story or the game, so it was kind of a fresh thing for me. But it was a really interesting way to tell a story, and it kind of pulls you in pretty quickly with what's going on. And the ending was a little abrupt for me, but other than that, I really enjoyed it.
I didn't actually play it, I just watched some of the Let's Plays. I think there's 3 popular ones out there. But it definitely felt to me like a pretty uncomfortable experience. And I also had the feeling like there wasn't really any choices. In fact, one of the last things they do is not give you a choice. So, just in terms of the type of games I like to play, it's probably not. I play games that are very different from that. I don't know. I like the graphical style. It's pretty cool.
I liked it. I had no idea it was a reference to Bluebeard until after I played it the first time. I was a little confused about who was talking the first time I played it too. I did play it twice. I played it again last night, and it was a little more clear after that. I like the Doom or Wolfenstein graphics. It kind of makes it more grotesque in a way. And this game kind of made me appreciate Doom's graphics a little bit more in that sense. And I thought the audio was really good and creepy, and it was pretty intense.
Yeah, so obviously I'm the one who chose this game, so it's probably obvious, but I'm a fan of it personally. I was a big fan of Terry Cavanagh and Stephen Lavelle's individual work before I played it, so I think I was a bit predisposed to give it the benefit of the doubt and stuff. So, but it's turned into one of my favorite things that either one has done, and a lot of the things that people mention are experiences that I had as well with it. The disorientation of kind of which character am I, and that confusion. I definitely had that initially, and started to become a more clear pattern for me. I don't know if that was the case for other people as it kind of went along, where I was like, okay, I'm switching back and forth like in a fairly predictable way. But, initially when it just does the kind of screen dissolve from, I guess, Jeff, who you're starting off as, to Judith, it was like very disorienting, and it took me a while to kind of get my bearings. That for me really, again, it helped kind of grip me in the beginning as far as, I got kind of stuck just trying to figure out exactly what was going on and stuff. And again, if it was a game that I was inclined to feel a little bit more impatient with from the start and not give the benefit of the doubt, that confusion might have turned me off. But because I kind of already had a fair degree of trust in the creators built up, I was just mostly intrigued more than anything else. So that was interesting. I do want to talk a little bit more with everybody about kind of how the first person perspective and the switching between the stories, what kind of effect that had on everybody. The main reasons that I chose this as our initial game were, there were some pragmatic reasons. First of all, wanted to choose something that was free and that was short for people to play, because we kind of decided that we were going to have our first meeting about a week ago. So, it seemed like, choosing, some kind of 80-hour RPG or something would not be the best bet. And I really did, as Alana and others have mentioned, the kind of choice aspect, and, the lack of choices within the game. And that is something that I think, Alana, I agree with you, or at least I have similar tastes, would be a better way of saying it, where I tend to feel like, the games that I gravitate towards are ones that have lots of interesting choices, right? Because whether it's a branching narrative or just an interesting system, those seem like the more game-like things. So what stood out to me about Judith when I first played it was the way that the absolute linearity of it kind of worked well for the story that they were telling, I thought, and the characters you were playing as, and just the overall kind of mood of the game. So that was something that I really liked about it, was the presentation of choices and the kind of way that it becomes increasingly apparent that there really aren't any, because there aren't really throughout the game. There's no kind of branching narrative or anything like that. It's just that becomes more and more obvious as you go along.
I mean, Rob asked earlier whether there were multiple endings or not. There aren't. It falsely makes you think that there are.
Yeah.
And towards the end, turns out there isn't any.
Yeah. So that'd be a good question. Is did people play through it just once? Did they play through it multiple times? And what was your experience with the kind of the choices that the game did offer?
I played through 1.25 times. The second time around, the first time around, I didn't pick up the necklace in the beginning of the game. And the second time around, I did, and then you'd walk around and it said, I should go put this back. So at that point, it was just kind of, a realization that you're probably not going to do anything at all other than what it wants you to do. And if you do something else, it will keep letting you do that until you do the right thing, and then it lets you move on.
I didn't actually play it, but I was watching these Let's Plays to get their experiences of these choices, and I think especially at the end, people were kind of a little, they enjoyed the game, but there was this sense of almost confused shock at the end of like someone was mentioning, it ends abruptly. Just what just happened? You don't really understand. It doesn't answer as many questions as it brings up in your mind. There's a lot of unanswered questions in it. So I definitely felt that way. It was there's a lot of ambiguity in exactly what's happened or happening.
Yeah, I agree. As far as the ending, I agree with it feeling very abrupt for me as well. And, it was reminding me a bit of, some of the, I guess particularly prominent examples in my mind of movies that I saw in the theater with an audience that had that sort of ending where it just really nothing was resolved. Not to spoil things too much, but something like No Country for Old Men, or certain, recent Coen Brothers movies, where I can remember being in the theater when No Country for Old Men ends, and without getting into any specifics, it's very much you don't quite expect it to end at the point that it does, and there's not really a whole lot of resolution to it. And I remember, the mix of kind of people gasping in the theater and also people being vocally irritated, that it had ended, really? That's, so some people were very, annoyed by it. Other people seem to enjoy that kind of, lingering questions that were intentionally left by the story. So, yeah, I guess since we're talking about it, what were kind of the rest of your thoughts on the ending?
I'm going to take the completely opposite approach and say I thought it was pretty complete. It's a very... there's two very clear timelines. There's two very clear conclusions between the two. It's not hard to guess what happens in the past. It's very easy to tell what happens in the future, or present, technically speaking. And yeah, I thought it was a pretty tight, complete story. And I was personally satisfied with the ending.
I may be thinking of the ending as kind of abrupt, I guess more in terms of tone, like the feeling that I had when I played it, because another thing that really stood out about Judith for me was just the mood and the atmosphere. Like you mentioned that, the sound design, I think is impeccable. Like it's kind of minimal, but it's really, really well orchestrated. Just all the use of effects and, when they use them and things like that. So everything about the mood of the game felt like so controlled to me, and really effective. Like for me, it was a very tense game, although I know that's not everybody's impression. And then the ending, it's very much like a sudden happy ending, was how I felt when I first played it. It was just like, oh, Jeff found Emily and let's never leave each other again. The end. It's like, wow, that seems like...
It also lends itself to another story there. Many stories. They go off into a twist theoretically, but then something doesn't work out, or there's some other kind of, twist or turn.
Yeah, for the sequel. For Judith 2?
Yeah, I guess, well, maybe that would be Judith 2.
I do say I thought that the ending was complete. I was, at the end, asking the question, okay, what was the relationship between these two timelines, because there weren't any outside of setting. So there was that moment. And after that, I had to do a bunch of research to figure out what the connections were, which fortunately I was right, there were none. But outside of that, that was like the only real question I had with the ending. But other than that, I didn't have any other questions. It was pretty self-contained and obvious to me.
I thought there was a connection, but it's more of a philosophical connection, not a direct one, but I don't know if I want to talk about that right now, or...
Yeah, but that seems like a good time if you're feeling good.
I feel like Judith's story, it's a story about trying to maintain the love she had, regardless of horrible circumstances, and how, as a player, it seems like the fact that you're especially not given a choice at the end, when most people who are not in that relationship would probably say, get the hell out of there. The fact that love drove her to basically irrationality, which to me was the most uncomfortable part of the whole experience, was that you really didn't have much of a choice in the things she was doing. Whereas with Jeff's story, or his perspective, is more straightforward. He was in love with someone and he was searching for them. And I think their whole relationship was about, again, it was like not an ideal circumstance. I think they were both married, possibly?
Yeah, it says they're
married,
both married.
not to each other.
Right.
Yeah, so they both, kind of were in love, but they, it wasn't an ideal situation. So it was similar, but it was a lot more light. And I just wasn't sure exactly how she got so lost in this place. Like, it seemed like almost a ghost story. Like, she didn't really exist almost. Just physically, the location where she appears defies logic, right? Like, there's, and you could chalk that up to a sort of video gamey thing. It's like, oh, why can Link just run into people's houses in Zelda and steal all their money and they don't care? Like, you could say it's that kind of thing. But, the more I mentioned, my initial reaction to the ending was that it was a happy ending. But in replaying it this time,
I didn't necessarily have that feeling as much, and mostly because I think I got caught up thinking about things that really didn't occur to me the first time through. And that was one, was the kind of, how did Emily end up in this like secret chamber that was like closed, you know? And it's just like, you know, either that's an oversight and you can just kind of dismiss it that way, or it's not an oversight, it's an intentional thing on the author's part. And then, you know, are they trying to suggest some kind of, you know, more otherworldly thing that happened? Or I think there were a lot of kind of suggestions of links between the two stories. So I didn't feel like they were completely disconnected, personally. But yeah, I'm curious what the rest of your thoughts were as far as, you know, you play most of the game as Judith, I would say, and then you have these kind of, in some cases, super short and like quite trivial things as Jeff. You know, what were your kind of feelings about the relationship between those two sections, or did you find like one to be extraneous, or did you find them to be more powerful because they were kind of interleaved in that way, or how did you feel about the relationship between the two sections?
Well, for me, I couldn't even figure out how they linked. Like, at first I started thinking, well, one is in the past, one is in the future, but then you couldn't tell which one was which because, you know, first it seemed like maybe the guy in the basement was Jeff from the previous story, except that then, you know, Judith says, I have this dream about this guy, in which case now you're throwing in the opposite direction. And it didn't make sense which one came first, or if they were even just two people in alternate realities crossing paths somehow. But honestly, I mean, there was just a lot of confusion as to exactly how things even linked up together. Outside of just small little things like, you know, the necklace, they both encountered the necklace, you know, but it was just, I don't know, I didn't grab the connection, especially at the ending, because, you know, you'd think that if it was Jeff who was in the basement and then buried, then how did he even get into the basement? They didn't even explain that during Judith's story.
Didn't he found the grave though? I think so. It had to then.
Yeah, that was a point for me that I felt like I had figured out the sort of temporal connection, because something that you had done as Judith was there as Jeff. So I had Judith placed in the past, but up until that point I was confused, like with things like the dreams. I felt like the dreams were kind of alluding more to Jeff's experience, and then I wasn't so sure anymore. Like, they almost seemed like maybe just more connected to the next thing you were doing as Judith, and they were just sort of foreshadowing that. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of confusion about it. I'm still not totally sure, even though that to me was one indication that seemed like a strong hint for me anyway.
I like the moment I figured out different colored text represented different people. I'm like, oh, okay, so this should be pretty easy to figure out then. Judith is the blue one. The husband is the green. Judith's husband, I mean. Jeff, I believe, is white, and Emily is, I think, yellow. So after that, it was just a lot, backward from there. It's like, okay, she said something about a dream, but at this point, we know that when Jeff and Emily were in there, the castle was entirely abandoned. So that has to be the quote unquote future. And then the Judith story has to be in the past. So I was able to unravel it incredibly quickly. I then got annoyed at that one part where I realized I didn't have a choice. I then stopped taking it seriously since then. So there's that too. I don't know. It wasn't a mystery to me. It was something that I could easily figure out very quickly.
But then if Judith's story is in the past, Judith's story had the basement full of gold. And Jeff's story, there was no gold. So who took all the gold?
The husband.
Disappeared over the years. And that was part of the reason I thought that storyline was in the past, and in part the dialogue too. They're talking about renting this place for the weekend, and then the conversation of Emily, oh, my husband just moved me into this fantastic castle, where it sounds like that may have been more old-timey and renting a place maybe newer. And as you're exploring stuff, you get the same rooms, but you already see the blood splatters there, and the money's gone, but the necklace is still there. But you don't really know if it's the same necklace or not. It's the same graphic, but it's a Wolfenstein graphics. It could have been just a generic necklace that was in the same place. So
I mean, they do say it was Emily's necklace, so who knows if she could have coincidentally dropped it there. But then again, there's millions of questions as to how the heck Emily even got into the last chamber. So she's a mystery on its own. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the kind of a tie is the necklace and the location, obviously. So that's why I was saying it was like a ghost story. Like they're almost reliving past events.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for whatever mysterious reasons, that place could be haunted, and it's kind of drawing the necklace back. It's drawing these couples back in maybe other lives or something, to kind of fix the wrongs that they've done. So I just bought Cloud Atlas on DVD, but that movie is also about kind of the same type of relationships over time, trying to fix the wrongs of the past. With these subtle hints, and so I got a bit of that, but it was still, like I said, very ambiguous and lots of room for guessing about what exactly was going on in the past or the future. And
it does give you enough clues to figure out what the heck is going on. So at the very least, I had to commend it for that.
Well, who was the one that was chained up, and then what was the pool of stuff? You couldn't really tell what that pull was behind him, right?
Yeah, I believe Bluebeard, the Bluebeard character, the husband, makes some allusion to, like, I've cried so many tears or whatever. So I was picturing it as, like, this weird pool of tears, which kind of, like, it was, that was an off note for me in a way of, like, because I was just filling it in, like, that was more of an amusing mental image to me at that moment, which kind of, like, it took me out of the mood a little bit. But yeah, I mean, is there even any visual for that? Or, like, he kind of alludes to it. But I couldn't kind of make out any visual element of, like, what this pool was. I just saw some dialogue referring to.
Wasn't that, like, really gray and muddy pond, swamp-like thing you're talking about?
Yeah, this would be... Oh, I mean the part, like, after the forest. There's the forest where you're kind of run away into the storm, and then the next room after that is just, like, Bluebeard standing there when the player is presented with the choice that's not really a choice, where you can only choose yes. Yeah, and there's something where Bluebeard's talking about, like,
choice there.
Oh,
you can press escape.
Yes.
There's
always that. There's always that.
Which is exactly what I did.
Yeah. I just, like, it is not a very detailed graphical game, so someone was mentioning the gore, so I don't know, like, the person who's chained up, you don't really know. Like, it could be an ex-lover, it could be a rival. You don't know what the Bluebeard character is doing, like, why is he doing these things? Like, his motivations, other than maybe he's powerful and he does this to people to maintain his power, but, you don't really... Like, the whole antagonist's motivation seems completely... I don't know.
I personally thought that whole part was just to paint him as a bad guy. And, I particularly didn't care too much about the prisoner per se, because I accepted it as a set piece to provide more character for the husband.
Well, that's sort of what the whole chamber is
right.
Doing, right, with each...
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a very notable example when you first find the prisoner.
I mean, to be fair, I guess when working with fiction, I expected to not provide all details, to not answer all questions, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So I was quick to accept that the prisoner was going to remain unexplained. I very quickly figured that out to be fact. So
that was actually one area where I had I don't know about the rest of you, but I had very mixed feelings about the pixelated graphics. Like, for the most part, I found them to be, as Ant said, like, very effective in heightening just the kind of the grotesquerie of everything that was happening by making me fill in these kind of mental details. But the prisoner in particular, because I couldn't discern the gender of the prisoner until there were some allusions in the dialogue to it. Like, it might be strange to say, but that actually did, because I gathered at that point, like, I'm playing as, this character's wife. And it's interesting to contrast with, like, the story. Like, if you read the original Bluebeard, probably not the original, but oldest known version, it's just the wife is given a key and told she's not supposed to use it. She goes and uses it, and then she finds the chamber full of dead former wives. And that's it. There's not this kind of progression of her finding more and more things. There may be in some other versions. I haven't watched the opera or things like this, but in the original tale, it's just, she goes and finds the chamber of horrors instantly. So for me, the kind of gradual reveal of these things had a very different effect in the game. But that was one, like, to me, that, like, finding a chamber full of dead ex-wives is like, that's like a much more blatant thing in a way about, like, this is what's happening to me now. Like, pretty much, like, this is what's going on. Whereas the prisoner, again, being like a very abstracted kind of visual representation of, like, a person. And yeah, again, it not being clear, like, why this is happening, what the relationship between this prisoner is and the husband. Like, it worked very well in this in terms of pacing, but I actually, I wasn't in love with it the first time that I played it, mostly because of the pixelated graphics, it was a bit odd, whereas I really liked them throughout the rest of the game.
Well, I think the audio part for that was great.
Yeah.
But, and then the text and, like, the graphics didn't do a lot to really, the person wants you to kill them, but they won't really tell you anything about why they're there. Like, I don't know, it just seems like there could have been a little bit more to, I don't know.
It's all kind of left to your imagination, like, both in terms of the visual and, like, the lack of explanation, which for the most part in the game I feel like is one of the most effective things. So it feels strange to me. I don't know why, like, that was, it had a slightly different effect on me the first time I played it, just that aspect of, like, I think it was just because I really was trying to discern, like, for some reason, is this a woman or a man who's chained up here? Like, when I first encountered it, that was, like, important to me when I first played through. I can't say exactly why, but
I think the minimalism of the game really lends itself to people just filling in the blanks with their imagination.
Yeah.
And the audio is great, but it is very minimal. It's not like it's someone screaming in the background. It's just this, repeated weird noise.
I didn't know it was a person. I thought it was some kind of monster.
I thought the audio was wonderful. The graphics gave me motion sickness, especially coupled with the fact I was not fond of the controls of the game. So, quite honestly, I didn't appreciate the graphics as much as I'm sure a lot of you did, because to me it affected how I will play the game. And in a very negative way too. So yeah, I mean, I can tell you I'm not a graphics whore or anything to that effect. I can easily take a pixelated game just fine, but this one in particular just made me sick in the stomach.
You probably didn't put as much work as John Carmack did in the Doom engine.
Safe to say. Yeah.
He probably has a lot to say about perspective and how you rotate and all that jazz. So.
I found some of the other visual limitations as well to be effective in heightening the horror. Not just the pixelated graphics, but also, like, the kind of limited field of view, where I think it was, like, the length of the hallway of the secret chamber when you're going through it. Like, you can't see to the end, I believe, as I recall from playing it. Like, it just kind of, it goes into the sort of, equivalent of fog or whatever it is, where it just goes off into blackness. So I found that very effective, particularly when the game was taking my controls away for the first time. And, like, I believe that happens for the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, when you pick up the sort of dagger or whatever it is to kill the prisoner.
Yeah.
Where it presents you with take dagger and kill prisoner before you hit the button. So you kind of get the idea, like, oh, this isn't, a normal, like, adventure game thing would just be like, take the dagger, and then I'm left to go there. But anyway, yeah, so when that first happened, even though it was maybe slightly hinted at ahead of time, like, it caught me by surprise. And the fact that I was being pulled, like, on a rail through, this area that, I found to be quite dread-inducing, and I can't kind of see all the way to the end, like, that really freaked me out. Whereas even just, again, better graphics and, like, a more full view would have
Judith was flying when she was, when she was in control. She's like, wow, you're moving faster than I can.
Everyone's very fast in this game. Everyone does seem to be a sprinter, which... I guess, if you live in a constant state of dread and fear, you might learn to sprint around a little more.
Maybe that's, I kind of thought about that when it was mentioned that maybe she was a ghost or something, like how fast she was moving.
Yeah, the kind of just billboard, fast billboard movement. It's kind of, it's unreal inherently.
Also, there's conversations with the husband when that character's not on screen, I don't think, for most of it. So it's kind of weird to have these conversations going on when you don't see either character there. It's just like it feels like there's nobody really there.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the first time, because it's the forest, right? When you first actually see the husband, like you turn around and he's there, or in Taro's case something else happened. But yeah, that to me was quite effective. Like, where I thought they did a really great job with that sprite actually. Probably, again, most of my reaction to it just had to do with the build up more than anything, but I found turning around and seeing the husband there, like, that's something that I feel like could have easily fallen apart totally. Like, if it was just a goofy looking sprite, because you've gone so long just kind of picturing the husband. Yeah. If it suddenly is like clashes with your mental image, it's a fairly risky choice, I would say. I know it didn't work out in everyone's case who played it.
Yeah, to clarify what Jamey's talking about, when I played it, I was always walking backwards to see if I can sequence break it in any way. And instead of turning around when you walk out into the forest, if you try walking backwards, your husband just teleports in front of you. And that kind of freaked me out more than turning around.
He is a ghost.
Second time around. It's like, poof! What are you doing there? And I'm like, how did you get here? So, I thought Judith's reaction of running away from him was validified because of his clear magical abilities.
You can't escape from teleporting. Those teleporting husbands are the worst. So, I want to circle back a little bit. This was kind of how I was going to start things off, and we've touched on it a little, but obviously everybody went and downloaded this game from Distractionware, Terry Cavanagh's blog, and the only description that was posted along with the game when they first uploaded it was this one sentence: Judith is a game about control. Intentionally kind of, slightly vague or open to interpretation statement. So I was just curious if anybody kind of had any thoughts about that in relation to their experience playing the game.
Yeah, I think when I think about what changes I would make to it, I definitely feel like giving the player more control, even if it is still linear. Like somebody mentioned, you pick something up and you have to put it back. I think that's better than just like not giving you the choice to leave it on the ground, even if that doesn't progress the story. Because I think there are other linear games that find ways of making it seem like your choices matter, even if it's going to go in the same direction. So, just blatantly taking control of the character or not giving you a second option seems very in your face to the player, saying this is what's going to happen. So I prefer usually at least the illusion of choice in games, so it's not just a movie that you're watching.
Maybe that's the point, because Judith, considering who her husband is, wouldn't have any control.
Yeah, for me, it was a kind of a form of characterization of Judith, which I know Tara and I had a bit of discussion about this earlier on. Like the, because as we mentioned, like all the choices in the game are false choices, and the game starts kind of making that more obvious and kind of placing that more to the forefront of the player's attention as it goes along, culminating in the final kind of dialogue choice with only one option. And yeah, I mean, for me, that was a really interesting thing. I mean, there's a lot of games that kind of play around with the idea of player control. Obviously, that's you could cite a lot of examples of those. But to me, it was, I found this to be a particularly compelling example of that, where, Judith is not necessarily a very well-rounded character because, again, she's following this sort of folktale style. Like, all the characters are fairly simply defined. But to me, this statement, Judith is a game about control, like, to me it was more a game about curiosity, but that tied in with the idea of control in the way that it was presented. Because to me, that was like Judith's defining characteristic as presented in the game, was this curiosity, this compulsion to, like, find out more about her husband and kind of keep exploring, like, opening the next door. And so the more that the game, like, basically with each successive scene that you play in as Judith, like, you're getting more and more control taken away. Like, that to me was one of the most effective things about the game, because it conveyed character to me, not through dialogue, but through the constraints that were being placed on me.
That kind of ties in to what I was saying. I was thinking about the tie between the two storylines was, in the present day storyline, you had a couple trying to hide their relationship. So there's a sense of they're being secretive towards their partners at home, their spouses. And, in the past storyline, you had a relationship where she's trying to uncover secrets about her husband, this Bluebeard character. Because so it's that kind of tension in relationships where sometimes you want to know everything about someone, but sometimes knowing everything about them can be a bad thing or painful. So, that's one of the questions I had, was what happened to the couple in the end when they were together. Did they end up leaving their partners? Like, did they keep it a secret? And then in the past relationship with that guy's secrets, I mean, it was kind of telling me there's certain things that you're probably better off not knowing. Like, everyone might have their own dark sides. So obviously, that guy was pretty horrible, but
yeah, I mean, get the law enforcement at that point, kind of thing.
I think that's a really great point. And that, when I was mentioning, like, that the Jeff and Emily ending to me felt like a happy ending the first time I played through it, but not so much the second time, and the more I considered it. And that was a big part of the reason was, Jeff and Emily located each other now, and they're let's never be apart again is great and all, but yes, like, they're both married to other people, and, as you mentioned, Alana, like, a big theme of the Judith and Bluebeard portion of the story was, like, secrets and, like, the cost of finding them out and the cost of keeping them and how they relate to control. So yeah, it's interesting to juxtapose the two stories in that way, where, like, it seems like a happy note at first, but the Jeff and Emily ending, but is it necessarily a happy ending? I don't know.
In regards to, taking away the control from the player, as mentioned earlier, it's a very common technique for video games to do that, especially in narrative portions, like, such as when cinematic occurs and you have no control whatsoever as what's going on outside of skipping it over. How dare you? So those kind of things. typically when a game takes the control away from the player, it's either to provide more characterization to the one you're playing as, or also to provide a sense of helplessness, to kind of make a more sad, more tragic storyline, which Judith was trying to do, in my opinion, both at once. And I think it was very smart to do that. It didn't quite do it to me specifically because I felt like it was pretty clear right from the get-go what Judith's personality is like. She's a curious person, and she's also very thick to the skull. So the moment she started taking controls away from me, I was significantly less impressed because I got nothing out of it. It just only reconfirmed the same thing we already knew about her. And I didn't feel the same way with, at least when I was playing Mother 3, where essentially at the end, you're taking control away in, classic JRPG fashion. And it was used a lot more effectively there, that, it adds more character to who you're playing as. But in this case, it just reconfirms what Judith is. There's nothing remotely interesting about her, other than she follows directions far too well, and so forth. So I was personally quite angry at who I was playing as, to be completely honest.
She was being controlled by Bluebeard.
I wouldn't even say
not
that.
You. Not the player.
So, can you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, I think there's a lot of ways where she is being controlled by Bluebeard, but it sounds like that was a feeling you had.
Maybe like a little, just thinking back about their conversations too, he would ask her questions and maybe he knew something was up. And he was asking questions to see what she would say or give a hint about what she's been doing behind his back.
I mean, it's actually pretty clear from the beginning that the husband is a very cautious person. He's very paranoid as to whether the secrets are going to be revealed or not. So,
to be in control.
Personally, I didn't see it as him controlling her so much as he being paranoid.
Well, that's part of control.
Yeah, so I definitely suggest that everyone who's involved in this discussion, anybody who listens, to go and read the original version of the tale, or at least what's considered the original these days by Charles Perrault. It is really interesting to contrast that with the presentation within here, particularly in the light of some of the stuff that we're discussing now. I mean, what was really interesting about the story to me, it's a pretty poorly written story, first of all, the Charles Perrault version, in my opinion. Some of the characterization is just very inconsistent and confusing. But in terms of the aspects of control that we're talking about with the relationship between Bluebeard and Judith, in the story, it's Bluebeard and his wife. She's not named Judith in the original story. And he just gives her a bunch of keys, like I said, and it does the thing that you see in a lot of stories of this key opens the far chamber, but don't ever use it. Now I'm gonna go away for a long time, so long. And then his wife almost immediately is compelled. It's not written in a way where it's super clear, at least not to me as a reader, but it's just written in that kind of Pandora's box style of it's more of a compulsive curiosity. So in a way you could say did Bluebeard want her to open it really? Because it's just such a ludicrous thing, of course, in the way that, but it's also a folktale. It's got that kind of fairy tale logic to it. But yeah, I felt like it was presented in the story and in the game as well as more just, again, it's compulsive, need to find out more, and some of which was potentially manipulated by the husband or by some outside factor. But a lot of which, to me anyway, it felt like a more internal thing to the character in a way. But that was just my own impression.
That might also be the other reason why I had such a not so positive experience with it, because I was able to figure out things very quickly, and to me it didn't provide enough mystery to ponder any further.
I felt like the thing with the key, kind of, and that's why it was kind of frustrating that he's sort of giving her, Bluebeard is giving Judith one last chance to listen to him, say I don't want you to use this key, but this is the key to that room or whatever. It's sort of like saying he wants to be in control of her, otherwise he doesn't really want her anymore. That's what I feel like. And just the fact that I can understand her taking the key, but then he says something like, go and see where all my former loves are, like the room with my former loves, and then she still goes in there. I was like, I just did a face palm thing.
Yeah, that's beyond curiosity at that point. It's I kind of know what's in here, but
and the fact that it's just a black room, again, it's kind of trying to let you imagine what was in there. But I think if it was a little bit,
I really was in there.
If it had some kind of graphic in there, it probably would have been, in my opinion, a bit more effective than just a pure black room where it could have been completely empty. I mean, so you can imagine stuff, but not having anything at all, just a complete void.
Well, my impression was, he said, if you go in there, what's inside that room is my former love. So she went inside the room. Now his former love is in the room. That was it.
I think the line is, my former loves await you, but I could be wrong. Which to me was just it was a direct allusion to the chamber full of dead ex-wives from the traditional story.
Yeah, I think it might have been loves.
Yeah.
I actually really liked the pure black at that point. And again, it was just inconsistent feelings that I had. The ambiguity of the prisoner for some reason threw me off. It took me out of things a little bit when I was trying to just figure out the details. But the black room, by that point, my kind of imagination was, I guess, running away with it. And the implications, again, because the implications led to a very specific thing for me. I had a very clear mental image without any further suggestion. So the black room worked for me.
Imagine if he had said that line, though, after she was already in there and turned around. And he said, now join my former loves, and then he closed the door. I think that would be...
That would be just evil.
That would make her less of an ignoramus. I don't know. She knows what's in there, and she's going to go anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe his former love was model shipbuilding.
That's right. Oh, you've discovered my darkest secret of all.
Did you say lovers or loves? I don't know.
I think he said loves.
Yeah, I thought it was plural.
That sounds like that was similar, as you were saying, Tara, a problem that you had was you felt like the character was so inherently foolish, and because you didn't have any choice in the matter, it was kind of bothersome to you.
At the point she finds a prisoner, I'm like, this woman is an absolute idiot. And at that point, I pretty much lost all hope on her. At the point where, at the end where she walks into a room and she got locked, I'm like, you deserve that. This is a happy ending for me.
Remind me not to marry you, Tim.
The setting as well, you're in a castle, you got gold in the basement, you got a prisoner. If you're back in medieval times, you can't just run out and call the police or run away. You're kind of in a situation that you're going to be stuck in.
Absolutely.
I assume that there was a lot of time-related issues that I was not taking into consideration, but even then, you'll probably know what kind of person is a really bloodthirsty person and who isn't, and at that point, I would have figured it out.
you may enjoy the original story more, Taro, because it pretty much has the equivalent of like the wife calling the police. Like Bluebeard comes back. There's some blood on the key that she wasn't able to clean off because it's a magical key. It's explained like very quickly, like, oh, the key was magic, so the blood won't come off. Bluebeard comes back right away. He's like, hey, what's the deal? Like, use the key. That's the thing I told you not to do. Now, guess you're gonna die. And then she's like, oh no, I don't want to do that. Can I say my prayers first? He's like, oh yeah, I don't see any problems with that. just you can go into just your locked chamber and just say your prayers for as long as you want. She's like, okay, cool. And then her sister's there for some reason. A lot of things just aren't established in the story, and it's like, oh. And then she said to her sister, look out the window, because she couldn't do it herself for some reason. But it also wasn't clear. And see if my brothers are coming, because her brothers were on the way, as it turns out. And then her brothers just show up and immediately kill Bluebeard. They just like come in the door and know what's happening and kill him. And so yeah, it's a very happy ending. She inherits all his money in the story and marries a much nicer person and forgets all about it. So you might enjoy that more. She was a bit less of a, one-note character in a way, and that she had some more agency, I suppose, in the story. But I just found it to be terrible. The story, I found this to be it's probably a low bar to clear, but I felt like the presentation in this game version of Judith was much more effective.
I was going to bring up in regards to, the game is about curiosity. I do commend the game for that. It does a very good job of taking the initial assumption that the player wants to know more about the world, and it does that really well. I don't know what other people's opinions were about that, but if I'm going to find some silver lining in the game where I play a character I don't like, well, that's going to be the one.
I don't know if anyone's... I don't want to get too off track, but comparing it to another story that's more modern, there's like a book and a movie called Gone Girl.
Oh, yeah.
I was very frustrated watching that movie because after the big twist is revealed halfway through, I just completely stopped caring about all characters involved. They were just...
Oh, just like my mom.
They were just horrible people, and they're doing horrible things. And, I just felt like, that in that movie, it's kind of like I called it the chauvinist version of what women are like, this very manipulating, like this guy's trapped in this relationship and all this stuff. It's trying to get sympathy for all these characters, but like everyone, in my opinion, is characterized as pretty horrible stereotypes and very two-dimensional. So I kind of felt like a similar type of story about a really bad relationship where there was no real change in the characters, but they were not very sympathetic. I don't know, I didn't have much sympathy for Judith because of what she was doing, it's like just to maintain her feelings and love. I mean, it's just, it kind of reminded me of Gone Girl, and how some people really like it, and for some reason they think it's a really powerful female character, just for whatever reason, because she's doing these horrible things. I don't know.
Within the game itself, Emily, I thought, had far more interesting character than Judith is, and she gets 2 lines in the game. And I was far more sympathetic of her getting lost and saying, oh, you found me, I was so worried. I get that. I feel like if Judith did that to me, I'm like, go back into that chamber.
I mean, there's also a lot. She does so much less stuff that there's less chance for her to do things that kind of irritate, people. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting analogy with Gone Girl. I think I was thinking of it almost in terms of the kind of stereotypical horror movie analogy, right? Of there's the stereotypical kind of yelling at the screen, don't go in there, you dummy, because you're gonna get slashed or whatever is gonna happen. But then when you're suddenly in control of this character, but not really, I can see how it would feel. I didn't personally have that experience, but I understand people are saying it was that much more frustrating to kind of be having to walk the person through those kinds of bad decisions and not really be able to do anything about it.
I mean, like, I figured if she's going to make bad decisions, and she should then, and as much as powers as I can, make even more worse decisions. So, like, for example, whenever you walk out the bookcase things, it shows very explicitly that she turns around and closes it, but it doesn't actually. But you can actually reopen it again and then walk out the hallway without bothering to close it. And I'm like, yes, you're his husband. That's why her husband knows.
At that point, that seems like your bad decision. I did notice that, the doors don't close behind. Like, you can close the bookcase, but I think not the inner chamber doors. Right. There was almost everything that I did from very early on in the secret chamber felt like a point of no return, which kind of it felt strange. And that almost added to the dread for me. It's funny the things that I thought about in terms of Judith, the character, and not. That was one where, again, you go into the chamber with the gold, where you find the necklace, and I don't think that you close that behind you. Mm-hmm. So it's right there, to me, it's if you're trying to cover your tracks, I don't know, just seems like a bad idea to go into this thing and just...
I think they're open once they're available to you, except for the one with the key.
Yeah.
So the treasure room was open, so there was nothing to close, but...
Could be. I feel like the prisoner door is the same way. But anyway, and once you've killed the prisoner and these things, so it's, but again, that to me, I'm saying that made it more compelling for me because I felt like I was going to get caught, each individual time. I felt like, oh, he already knows, he must know. Yeah. How can he not? Whereas, yeah, if I'd been thinking about that part more in terms of Judith's characterization, more than anything, or again, watching a movie where she's going in there and then not shutting the door behind her, I would be more irritated with the character. So it's interesting how that line works. But it seems to be quite subjective because we had some very different experiences of it.
Well, in I'm trying to remember, there's always going to be plot holes, and even in Gone Girl, there's a scene where there's an interrogation, and everyone is just sort of choosing to believe someone's story. They don't really check stuff. So I didn't
just like human beings.
I mean, yeah, I didn't necessarily believe that the Bluebeard knew what was going on. Maybe he did. Maybe he did trust her to some extent, but then, him just showing up in that spot where,
the infinitely walking forest.
Yeah, why, must have been following her or something, because otherwise, I guess if she just happened to be outside, I don't think it would have been a big deal.
Yeah, he can teleport.
That's true, he does have those powers. To take that into consideration. Yeah, I mean, he just kind of... You turn around, he's there, and he says something almost immediately, as I recall, about, I know what you've been doing. But it's not clear how long he's known or how he figured it out.
Well, you figure they're the only ones in the house, and the prisoner ends up getting stabbed, and then all of a sudden disappears.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big gotcha.
There's apparently some servants, because there's a reference to you should let the servants do that.
Yeah, the maids.
As well. So you could always... I suppose you could always blame it on one of the servants.
It is worth noting that there's one line to me that struck an interesting note, and I didn't really think of it much further after that, but there's a point where the husband goes, you had a dream of a weak man. I hope you don't think of me as weak either, or something to that effect. Yeah. And I thought that was an interesting character development because suddenly we have who is clearly a really murderous, almost murderous, has this either fetish of torturing people, and now you get the better impression that, okay, this is a guy that likes power, that likes the feeling of being powerful. And so, there are subtle hints that kind of gives you as clues as to why the prisoner is even there from the first place, which I thought was a satisfactory explanation as to why he's even there. So, I don't know. There was I thought that there was enough to paint a pretty clear picture in the game that. that I didn't really concern myself with the ambiguity of things.
Just to return to, you were mentioning a little bit, Taro, earlier, the way that the game kind of preyed on the player's desire to kind of like explore and things like that, and some of those natural player instincts. And that to me was something that struck me more the second time around, was just the level design. Like I don't have as much background in level design, so I've been trying to kind of pay more attention to these sorts of details in games I play. But it's such a constrained game. But the thing that actually struck me the most was the initial environment, where you're in the hedge maze, which is very much like most of the game is, where you just start off in this tunnel, and then you come out into this there's a very open garden, which is, again, like, it's, these are elements that could be considered extraneous in some ways. Like, there's that it could be any type of environment, but it's this open garden with these kind of hedgerows where you can kind of see that there's multiple rows. And like that, to me, something about that environment design really triggered my desire to like walk all the way around this open area and see like, oh, what are behind these like hedgerows? Mm-hmm. So I spent like a bit of time in that open space, and it really heightened, like, then once I went inside and I was just in like the tunnel of the rest of the game, like it really heightened the kind of claustrophobia of it. And it was, again, it's like nothing in the game that's forcing me to do that. It was just the kind of design of the space that affected me. I don't know if anybody else did anything similar, or if you had that kind of feeling from it, because I only noticed it more consciously the second time through.
I can tell. Oh, sorry.
I felt like the claustrophobia of the initial area before we find the secret passageway. There's just not. It's a pretty confined space, so I was just thinking again, if Judith is married to this guy and she knows they live in this huge building, but she's only seen a couple rooms, like what is all the rest of the building like? It just seems kind of strange that there's so much of it is in this hidden area that's obviously not able to be hidden in like a wall or down on the basement or something. I don't know.
I do agree with your observation that one of the first things I did was walk around the hedges and see if there was anything in between, which was probably contextually really weird, since Emily is standing right there in front of you and she's expecting you to walk directly to her. It was also hilarious too that I ended up walking backwards and she started talking at the back of my head. So I'm like, okay, this clearly was not supposed to happen. It is interesting that, right from the get-go, it kind of plays with your expectation. It says, hey, this is a claustrophobic area, and then now you're going to this much more open space where you feel a lot safer, and then you walk into this castle and you feel a lot less safe again. So, yeah, I do agree with your observation that it's a fascinating dynamic that they did just with colors and level layout alone.
Yeah, I just had a couple other random notes here. I mean, some of them are things that we've kind of touched on already. A thing that remains elusive to me, even, having played through the game multiple times now, and again, that's not elusive is not inherently bad, is the dreams. Judith's description of the dreams. Like, I'd like to go back to that again and just hear people talk a little bit more about kind of what effect that had for you, because we talked about it in terms of kind of placing the Jeff and Emily stuff in time, like before or after. Like initially, I was reading the dreams as being directly related to Jeff and Emily's story, because there's some references to a man lost his. So I can't remember exactly how it's expressed, but basically, like, it seems to be following very closely, like, this couple got separated, I think, is kind of the thread, and then the woman dies. The man buries her. I don't remember the exact sequence. The man takes his own life, which is when Bluebeard is saying, "You dream of such a weak man." And so, yeah, initially I thought like, oh, this is somehow related to the Jeff and Emily stuff. But as it went on, I kind of fell away from me, and it still is the case. Like, I don't have like a particular direct way that those connect for me. But like, did you have any feelings about the dreams and what kind of role that played, just in your experience playing or in the story?
For me, it seemed like they were more connected in the beginning, where it seemed like she was just making observations of what Jeff was going through. Mm-hmm. And then as you get towards the end, like when he finds the dagger, and that's when it switches, I think. And that's when she says she dreamed of a guy that was going to kill himself, when that wasn't happening. You found something, you picked it up, and then she was projecting something else that hadn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know if maybe they were just kind of similar, and as you went along, you realized maybe these aren't the same stories, and she's not really dreaming of the stuff he's doing.
I feel like I maybe read that as foreshadowing the first time that I played, when I didn't know what was going to happen. But that was where, like, because it was following, and now suddenly she's describing things that haven't happened yet that are terrible. It created, again, more of a sense of dread with the Jeff and Emily story, which was so straightforward. Like, if you were to follow Jeff's sequence, he just pretty much goes straight from the entrance through the tunnel.
Clues.
I guess, yeah.
But manages to find the key to open the door that Emily somehow walked through. Either that or it was open and then she locked herself in. Yeah. One of the two. And finally, but yeah, you're right. Otherwise, it's like an incredibly uneventful. The guy panics for a second, looks all around and finds her, and he's like, oh, there was nothing else to worry about, kind of thing.
I definitely, like, when I mentioned the kind of the tonal kind of the way that it was tonally jarring for me, the game, the ending in particular, like that, I think that was why, was like the dreams. I mean, everything about the game and Judith's sequence, obviously, but probably the dreams in particular, like really led me to believe like something terrible is going to happen in this other section as well. And I opened the door, and Emily pops out, and like, hooray! The end was. I just like. It didn't actually particularly, again, obviously it didn't dampen my enjoyment of the game to any significant degree, because I really loved it. And I kind of feel like, everything that the dreams and everything Judith's sequence did to like build up tension and suspense, like, is kind of independent of the resolution. Like, I felt a huge amount of suspense up to the point where, as Jeff, I opened the door. And the fact that Emily was there and it was a happy ending, like, if it had been a bad ending, it still would have been as suspenseful up until that point. Like, the resolution would have been the kind of the relief of that suspense either way. But it did still feel like very surprising to me. Again, like, I felt like maybe the dreams were just like a bit of a head fake thing to make you imagine one thing. At least that's what they did for me.
The timings on those were also disjointed, so that kind of threw me for a loop as well, because one timeline is going, it seems like, progressively over days. Whereas as you're looking in the first character, it's a run through where
it's 24 hours.
Yeah, well, a lot less than 24 hours, but
very slow moving.
I'm just wondering, because I don't know if you talked about this directly, but I think you mentioned the two storylines. I don't really know if that the game needed the Jeff and Emily storyline. Like, it feels like, I don't know, that's part of why maybe the ending was kind of weird. It's just like, it's such a small part of the game overall.
I can definitely say the first time I played through, I was not as involved in the Jeff and Emily story. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it ended with them, like, I think my impression the first time playing was like, oh, it should have ended with like Judith and the chamber door shutting, because that was so effective. So yeah, I kind of felt like the first time through was a little more extraneous. But I didn't feel as much that way. I mean, you were mentioning the kind of the thematic, this kind of thematic links that are there for you to form. So, I mean, to you, it sounds like maybe that wasn't like enough of a reason to kind of justify that bit in the end. Like, it didn't.
Yeah, I think if they did more explaining, like, kind of what happens to that couple, or like I was saying, it felt to me like a ghost story, like they were reliving some of the things of the past, and maybe they were reincarnated versions, but it really wasn't tied together enough to make me, like, other than the necklace being there in both stories. I think if there was a stronger connection there, that was fleshed out more the way it is in like other movies or Cloud Atlas or something. Where even then, the movie and the books are much better at doing that. The movie is much more like this rushed through experience. I think it could have been, if that's what they were going for, I think they could have heightened those elements a bit more to make you care more about, like maybe they're getting it right this time, or just trying to drive that home, because a lot of people probably don't get that experience. They just think it's too, like the story is kind of a throwaway story almost. So I don't think everyone was picking up on what I was picking up on.
To be completely honest, so when Dylan mentioned that at some point he figured out that there was no connection between the dream and the Jeff and Emily story, I actually figured it out much sooner than that. At the point where Judith says something along the lines of, there was a man, he was crying tears of blood. I think that was the line. At that point I knew that the dreams and the two timelines had absolutely no connection with each other whatsoever. It's just that the set pieces happens to be in the same place. And I was right. I called it on that. So since I was already starting with that assumption of these two are completely unconnected, I was a lot more satisfied with the ending of, oh, okay, so one of them ends with a happy ending and the other one ends with a significantly less happy ending, which I still think was deserved. So yeah, it was. Maybe that's kind of like why I was far more okay with it. I don't know.
Super happy endings.
Well, it's more like a relief ending.
The Jeff and Emily's, that's the story I had more questions of, which is funny because that was the one that had very little happening. Mm-hmm. With the Judith storyline, you knew what was happening as it was going through. You knew it was going to end badly. But the other one, you just, where did they get this necklace? How did she end up in the room? All these questions that make you think what might be going on, but never get answered. And that's why I think the ending was such a stop. Where it's over. You don't get any of your answers.
Interesting, because I didn't make any of those assumptions. I didn't. I'm like, either she's gonna find her or he's not. One of the two, and he found her. Okay, so that was the better ending. That was like that was the most connection and concern I had.
You got the good ending. Collected all 120 trinkets.
Yep,
the good ending. Well done. Yeah, it's interesting. I found it to be, you were mentioning Taro, and I know we were reading some different people's impressions when we were kind of talking about it before, and some people were saying like, oh, there's no connection between the two, and I don't feel like there's no connection between the two. I just feel like it wasn't a super direct, like explicit connection, but we've talked about a lot of the ways that the two sections inform each other, just in terms of mood and these kind of hints of like a narrative link that's never spelled out, I think intentionally. Yeah. I was actually reading up on, trying to find what I could about what Terry Cavanagh and Stephen Lavelle have written about the game and their intentions. And I found some, I can't remember where, but I'll find the link and we'll hopefully post it like along with this in the description of this video. But there was somewhere where one of them was talking about how they actually had more kind of gamey type things in the Jeff and Emily section at one point, or at least that's what they were planning, more kind of impediments, I guess, like in more traditional game obstacle type way, whether it was a puzzle that you solve or something, whereas as it stands, like the only puzzle in air quotes in the game is like finding the book, I think, to like
pulling it in the right
find
place.
The secret chamber. And they just kind of decided as they were going along that wasn't the core of what they were trying to do with the game, to add that in. So it could be that, the Jeff and Emily stuff in its final form that we experienced is maybe a bit more of a vestigial element. I mean, it definitely feels like a secondary thing in a way that just kind of informs Judith's sequence, which to me is the main thing. I mean, I felt like it was just more of like a framing device than anything. But yeah, I mean, Dylan, as you mentioned, like a lot of the ambiguity, particularly for me the second time I played it, and I just I already knew the story, so I had more time to kind of ponder these little side elements, like things like, again, the logic of how this happened and there's unanswered questions that I read as intentional, like not just like a weird oversight. And I like that aspect of it. I do think, to me, the Judith story, though, as it went on, like it had such an air of inevitability to it that like it was actually the Jeff and Emily story, although I wasn't as involved with their characters necessarily. Like that, it was more of a question mark as far as what was going to happen there. I mean, yeah, you could boil it down to either he finds her or he doesn't, but
Right.
there's lots of potential like narrative details involved with that, and like, you know, you could find her and something terrible could have happened, you know, any number of terrible things that are suggested by the Judith sequence and the area that you're in. So yeah, I think it would be weaker personally as just the Judith section, but I don't know that I have like a very well reasoned argument for that beyond those little things.
It does. The Jeff story kind of also works well as sort of like a sequence breaker to kind of let you relax a little bit. In that, okay, there's one thrill moment that you experience, and there's this short segment where things are significantly safer, but you're not quite sure how things are connecting and so forth. So that might also be the other reason. As a narrative paradigm, it was supposed to kind of provide more of a release for the player, as well as heighten a few other aspects of their feelings.
Ooh,
I do
right.
think like that part was effective too, but then again, I was pretty quick to deducing that there was no connection and kind of was satisfied long before the game ended.
The Jeff sequence provided transitions between each of the days for Judith. If Judith just walked to one spot, did a little bit of her story, and then suddenly faded out, faded back into her bedroom, it wouldn't feel as much of a game. It would have felt more like we were watching a movie.
Right.
By providing Jeff's sequence between each transition and her waking up in the bed, it gives us the illusion that we're playing a game.
Yeah, I think it helped, create that disoriented feeling as well. Like in the beginning, just having two characters to switch between. But yeah, definitely in terms of pacing, like I think there were some benefits.
I think it could have benefited also, like people were mentioning, the hard to distinguish who was talking and all that. I think if it was more obvious which person you were when you were playing, like instantly, if there's some kind of either GUI or something on the screen, whether it's a representation of your arm or something that could say, okay, I'm this character now, instantly without,
There was an audio cue. When Judith walked, it sounded like she had heels.
Oh, I didn't even pick up on it.
I mean, there's some subtle things like the dialogue and stuff and such, but I feel like, because to me, like, it's pretty important to know, like, which character you are, so the fact that you couldn't always immediately tell which character you're playing as until you go and do stuff. Again, it might have reinforced the whole, like, this is the same person in a different lifetime, but, I think for a lot of people they just saw it as confusing. They didn't really connect the two necessarily. But yeah, that's, like I mentioned with the dialogue, if you had seen the person you were talking to even a little bit, like, you knew that he was in the room rather than just, somebody who's talking to themselves. I don't know. Just a couple more graphical cues could have made me feel like I understood what was going on a little bit more, maybe.
Cool. I feel like we've probably gone about an hour or so.
Okay.
Which is probably, it seems pretty good. So I just wanted to go around if anybody had any kind of final closing thoughts and give people a chance to kind of say their final statement on Judith, if you like. I guess I'll start rather than blindside people. So I mostly just want to say thanks to everybody for playing it and joining in on this discussion, first ever Game Club discussion. I would definitely recommend. I don't have a lot else to say about Judith. We touched on a lot of the topics that I wanted to, but I would just suggest definitely check out other work by Terry Cavanagh and Stephen Lavelle. Stephen Lavelle's site is increpare, or increpare, as I'm not 100% sure, .com, INCREPARE. And then Terry Cavanagh's site is distractionware.com. And they do quite a wide range of stuff. So Judith is actually kind of an outlier for both of them. Obviously, for anybody who's played like Super Hexagon, it's a fairly different experience from Judith, I would say. But yeah, anybody else have any final thoughts on Judith? Can we wrap up?
It's definitely a game where it tries to provide an example of why you want to give less choices or less control to the player. And I appreciate for what it's trying to do. As an observation of, how the player reacts to, reduced stimulus, reduced control, reduced that kind of stuff, I think it's a great studying material. Personally, for this gamer, I thought it was ineffective at what it was intending to do. But then again, previous experience may have already colored my opinions about that. So I'll let the player decide on that.
I just thought that, like I was saying, I wish there was a little bit more to the Jeff and Emily segments, if they were going to be included, and just, a better sense of, even in both segments, either more explanation or more visual detail about what was going on. So overall, it felt like the experience was almost the game was a bit rushed or short. Like I would have liked to see a bit more in the game, maybe a bit longer game, I don't know, than it turned out to be. But
it's interesting. I had the exact opposite experience because as a non-gamer, I'm much slower in terms of actually getting through the steps. And at first, I thought that at a very early stage, that I'd actually finished, and my first comments are not completely appropriate there. But so that different people will experience the pacing probably very, very differently depending on their frame of reference.
Yeah, I'm always happy for a nice short game these days, personally. That's just me. Okay, cool. If there's no other kind of final wrap-up thoughts, then so we'll have a different host next time who'll choose a different game. I think we're going to actually do some kind of like drawing straw.
Hello, this is Taro Mia. I'll be the host for the next game club that's coming up at May 2015. The next game we'll be talking about is Lisa, also known as Lisa the Painful RPG. That was the name of the Kickstarter campaign, which is available on Steam right now for $9.99. It's a very interesting JRPG that, as the title implies, is also very painful too. I'll see you guys next month.